The plane was to carry 160 people. And remember, the 160 people were going to perish with the Tom in the plane. But now Tom had a lot of wisdom. He went to Ethiopia in a very different way. He landed, because it was a meeting, there was a good plan. There were people who were meeting the guests, taking them to the restaurant, and later taking them to the meeting hall. Now Tom did opposite way. When he landed at the airport, he took a taxi, and instead of going to the restaurant or going to the meeting hall, he went direct to El Salesi's office. Now he was doing this because he was representing the president. He knew very well the president would have not gone anywhere before visiting El Salesi's office. Actually, El Salesi did not expect him, and he even questioned what Tom was doing in his office. But now Tom told him and convinced him that he was there representing the president, and he must do everything that the president would have done. He had to go to El Salesi's office. He had to sign the visitor's book. Now, the more they talk with El Salesi, the more El Salesi changes his mind. Tom was a convincing man. And even when when Tom leaves El Salesi's office, he was actually warned by El Salesi that there was a political heat back in Kenya, and even advised him to go for an exile. But Tom was determined. He said it was better for him to die in his country for his people than going for an exile. Tom got an opportunity to address the meeting. He gave a 1 hour 30-minute speech. That was the last speech he gave. It was a wonderful one. Tom was cheered. He was called names. There were others who were like addressing him as Mr. President. Now, when the message came back home, Tom's rivals became so much upset. And in fact, they tried to convince Kenyatta that Tom had like overthrown his government. And Kenyatta was very strict on Tom. He knew Tom's ability. He did not want anything against him. Now, what Tom's colleague did now was to take advantage over Kenyatta's health. They did everything out of Kenyatta's knowledge. So when Tom came from Ethiopia, he actually went direct to Kenyatta's house to actually give him the brief of the meeting. But the plans had been made that Tom would not be allowed to even see Kenyatta. So Tom could not understand what actually was happening, why he would be locked out of Kenyatta's house or compound. He had no option than to go home, but still he could not settle. So the next day was now on the 5th of July. This was a Saturday, a weekend. Normally during weekends, Tom would work up to maybe a half a day, and then he would release everybody and they go for the weekends. So because Tom had traveled, he had planned that at around 12, he would pass by a pharmacy to buy some drugs. Now at around 10, some Luo elders paid him a visit. They stayed up to 12. And now as he leave the office, somebody prominent in the then government called him and booked an appointment with him, arguing he had a private but an urgent discussion with him. Now because this person was one of the dignitaries, prominent personalities within the country, it forced Tom to release everybody close to him, and he drove to the chemist. Now, as if because the two had agreed that they would meet there. That was a big pharmacy attended by dignitaries. It had even a boardroom. So they both agreed they would meet there. Now Tom drove to the pharmacy, and as he parked his car, the first person he met was his killer, Isaac Nashon Jenga Joroge. Now Jenga and Tom were not strangers. They had known each other way back from 1960, during the inception of KANU. Jenga was just part of the youths. Tom secured him a job in the military. Jenga later became a sniper, and Tom decided to have him as as the head of his security details. Now, when they met, they were meeting for the first time because Tom had sent Jenga to Bulgaria to be trained in a special military training as a sharpshooter. He had just returned, but he had not resumed his work. So when they met, Tom was very happy to see him. They hugged, they shook hands, and they had a little discussion. Then Tom told him he was entering the pharmacy to buy drugs. He also wanted to see somebody briefly. Then he go for lunch. Then later he had planned to watch a football match between Gor Mahia and Abaloya FC. And now, because he had released everybody close to him, he even requested Jenga to hang around so that he would accompany him to the field. But now, Tom did not know Jenga was there after his life. Remember, the lot that Tom had released to go home. Normally when they are released during the weekend, they would go to Tom's house, have lunch, and then it's when they disperse. But this time when they went, Pamela, when realizing they came without Tom, did not allow them even to alight. He sent them back to go and look for Tom and come back with him. So they drove back to the pharmacy where Tom had told them he was heading to. And from a distance, they would see Jenga and Tom like chatting. So they said there was no cause for alarm, because Jenga is somebody they knew they were working with, and so they had to park their car from a distance. But then they would see Tom walking in the pharmacy as Jenga walks away. Now Tom went there, he bought the drugs. It took like 45 minutes waiting. Unfortunately, this person did not show up. We were made to understand later that this person did not actually want to see Tom. He only wanted to know his whereabouts so that he would send his killer after him. So when Tom realized he was not coming, on his way, he left a message with the chemist lady and gave her her movements, the way he will move on the entire day. So as he walked out, Jenga did not hesitate. He shot him immediately at the chest. Now Tom cried, begged Jenga, mentioned to him or reminded him on some of the things that they had done together. But Jenga closed his ears. What he did instead was to add the second bullet. Now Tom felt down, and when the lot that had parked a distance realized there was like a commotion, they came out. The bodyguards who were armed. But immediately they reached the premises, had been surrounded by over 50 armed police officers. So what they did was to work Jenga away, leaving Tom lying there. Now, the watchman, the bodyguards, the personal assistant, the chemist lady, and the driver struggled. They called Nairobi Hospital for an ambulance. Ambulance came, but it was a bit late. And remember, it came without a doctor. The doctor came later, and we believed it was like a delaying tactics to make sure that Tom was dead. So they rushed him to Nairobi Hospital. Unfortunately, he died upon arrival. It followed by protests, demonstrations, lootings, killings. People forwent jobs. There was no going to school. And now, Tom had to be buried as quick as possible for the normalcy to return. On the 9th of July, Tom's body was driven from Nairobi to Homa Bay St. Paul's Catholic, a church Tom had helped build. The body stayed overnight. The next day, on the 10th, the body was driven from Homa Bay to Rusinga home. Then on the 11th, Tom was laid to rest here.